So today we're going to talk a lot about the HPA axis, so the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which I've mentioned in previous podcasts, and
Yes.
it plays a big role in the gut, brain, and immune health, which is what I talk mainly about. And
Yes.
today, Shannon, we want to cover fatigue, its relationship to the HPA axis. We'll talk a lot about cortisol and everything that affects the HPA axis. So, just for viewers out there, can you just give a basic rundown on the HPA axis and maybe how it relates to your clinical practice?
Yeah. So the HPA axis it's been around for so long, and there are a lot of people talking about the cortisol, but the HPA, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. So the times of stress, and we've got the balance of the sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system. Very briefly and simplistically, a lot of people are in that overdrive of being overstimulated. So therefore, the brain is trying to get you to run away from danger, stimulating the pituitary to trigger the cortisol release from the adrenals, which sit on top of your kidneys. Then the cortisol, it is helpful in small amounts. So it can help us give us that burst of energy, or it can help the muscles, it can help us run away from danger. But prolonged is definitely a no-no. So that's the issue we're talking about today, is too much cortisol and the damage to the gut,
Yep,
which is the biggest
indeed.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, this prolonged stress, it's really a part of our day to day, isn't it? Like, and
Mm.
there are many factors that can contribute to this, even unbeknown to the individual, because a lot of people, when this is the fight or flight thing is discussed, it's, the examples of when we're back in the day when we used to run away from monsters like dinosaurs and
Yes.
tigers and whatever, and that's a extreme example, but in this day and age there are many small examples in just
Mm-hmm.
everyone's work environments and different pressures, things contributing to stress. What do you commonly see in your patients that are in that are increasing their stress and they're not realizing how that is playing out in their health?
Well, it's the majority, really, if I'm to be truthful. Majority of people in this day and age, they have stresses. I have stress as well. I'm sure you would as well. But when do you draw the line? Because let's list a few. This artificial light, people going to bed at 9, 10, not being in rhythm with the circadian rhythm, and going to bed when nature says the sun's going down, it's time to wind down. You've got work hours. So many people doing 12-hour work days and not having adequate rest. Food is thrown in there, really poor quality food, and financial stress, people putting themselves through unnecessary bank loans for houses, or and I could go on, but there's stress all around. If you just look, that constant stress of your boss, perhaps you're working at a job that you hate and you're just going there to get the money. And then every day you wake up and think, oh no, I have to go to work and see this boss that just, and so there's no time for resting and chilling out. It's just constant foot on the accelerator, and that cortisol is just pumping. Yeah. So did I give you enough?
Yeah, there's plenty of examples there, and
Yeah.
I'm sure many can relate to many of those examples. And there's
Yes.
also, like, what I often say to my patients, even things like purchasing a house can be a
Mm.
stressful thing, even though it's positive, or having some of my patients are quite athletic, and they do competitions and in the
Mm.
weekends or
Mm-hmm.
what have you, and they see a lot of this. Well, it's very positive, but they can be very stressful. And a classic is,
Yes.
running a family. We love our children, and
Most
and
definitely.
doing things with our family, but that can be very stressful, and especially if sleep is affected too. So I think you've got to look a bit broader when you're considering stress and what is potentially increasing your cortisol levels, which is the stress hormone you mentioned, and that
Yes.
can have a huge impact on health. And on that note, perhaps we could talk a little bit about how the HPA axis affects gut health in particular and impacts the integrity of the gut. And, something like cortisol would be one of those things. Can you talk a little bit about that for us too,
Sure, yeah.
Shannon?
So just prolonged stress is pumping the cortisol. Now, just from what we said, that's a stress hormone. So it's gearing the body to run away from that. What did you say, dinosaur or tiger or whatever?
I think I used the
But
term monster.
monster, yeah, yeah. And you should run away from that shark or whatever. But prolonged, so being in a stress state, your muscles are getting ready to run and the blood's here and you're not thinking of digesting food. It shouldn't be. It should be focused on the running away. So prolonged, then all of that flow and the nutrients and the function of the bile and the acid that make the gut healthy, and then it's enhancing inflammation as well, just starts to damage that wall. So that microvilli in the wall where we get the food molecules coming across, the classic leaky gut. I'm pretty sure you have a video on that leaky gut, Brad, where people are getting the leaky gut and then getting autoimmune and other conditions.
Yes, so that constant rise in cortisol, we know, depletes secretory IgA, which is that first line of defense on the gut mucosa, which is the gut lining, if you will. And when that's sort of stripped down, then it makes the gut lining more vulnerable, doesn't it? So,
yes.
that's there's a vicious cycle there because the gut lining gets damaged, and then the absorption of nutrients can be compromised, and then the inflammation that can be raised by high cortisol and stress can be exacerbated by the damage to the gut lining as well. So,
yes.
And you mentioned, interesting too, you mentioned hydrochloric acid or stomach acid and digestive enzymes, and that's often compromised, and we see this in microbiome testing. We can pick this up, but generally good case taking will pick these sort of things up as well. And if people aren't chewing their foods and so forth, we can see that result in the stool, and this sort of thing going on compromises the metabolism of nutrients as well, and if there's leaky gut, like you mentioned, the poorly broken down proteins and this sort of thing can cross that gut wall, causing immune complexes throughout the body as well. And perhaps we jump from the impact of stress on gut health to its impact on immunity as well, and talk a little bit about that, and maybe relate that to what you may have seen in your clinical practice, Shannon.
Yeah, it really is. It's almost linked to everything. So its effect on immunity, as Brad said, is that secretory IgA, that immunoglobulin, and then the leaky gut, and then all of the toxins coming in and compounding on the immune system. And then pathogens are coming in as well. So opportunistic bacteria like strep or parasites, and they're exacerbating the inflammation and reducing the immunity. Also, the cortisol is having a negative effect on the blood sugar levels. So getting away from danger, it's trying to get the body to consume more sugar, which is in the long run a negative thing. And there's often a progression into insulin resistance and even worse, diabetes. But all of those things together are reducing the immune system. And it's a vicious cycle, keeps worsening the digestion as well. Yeah, so cortisol is beneficial, but long term, definitely a negative. And that's why we're here trying to help you.
And you just mentioned the pathogens coming in too, and it reminded me of a lot of cases that I've seen where Helicobacter pylori is common, which is obviously we know that causes stomach ulcers, and it's indicated there, and it's something that does pop up. You probably every year, you're probably like me, every year you see cases of back to pylori. And stress is one of those things that will contribute to that, but also PPIs, so protein pump inhibitors, that
Yes, the
medications.
antacids. Yes.
Yeah, so many patients are on those, and you get a situation, and this is all too common, where people are taking these protein pump inhibitors, plus their stress is through the roof, and they're
Yes.
just so vulnerable, and their gut breaks down on so many levels, and then you've got poor immunity, and it's incredible, that combination of stress, as well as being on a medication like a protein pump inhibitor, can be really catastrophic for some individuals.
Yeah, the stress and the cortisol even affects the sphincter above your stomach. So with that constant stress and tightness, it becomes opened up, and then the acid is more likely to regurgitate. So is it like a chicken or the egg? The patient says, well, I need these antacids. And yes, but we're trying to get the system working. So it's a tricky one at the beginning, telling the patient, we ultimately don't want you to have to take these, but we understand you have to take them.
Yep.
But in the long run, we will actually want more acid, which is a tough one sometimes for patients to get their head around. But it's not that acid. It's more about the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and the fermentation of the foods.
Yes, yeah, and it's a delicate balance, isn't it? Because you're like me in many ways, where we have this integrative approach, an integrative outlook, where if someone comes to us on a lot of medications, we are trying to we can't just tell them don't do medications, and some patients will come to you and say, oh, I want to get off them, and some patients want to go cold turkey, and I just say, no, look, you can't do that. You've got to be much more strategic about it, and
only because it'll make it worse.
Exactly.
So often.
Yeah, exactly. You can't, when you've been on things like medications for long periods, they alter your physiology. So it's a really hard thing just to come off these things. So what I think we do well is incorporate what we do, whether it's herbal medicine treatments, nutritional, diet and lifestyle interventions, in with the current pharmaceutical treatments. And then we start looking to get good results with what we're doing and improving. It might be standard pathology test results and so forth. And when we improve those, and then the patient themselves is empowered to go back to their GP or specialist and say, hey, do I really need to be on this medication, or can I lower the dose? Can we taper off? And then they can have that conversation with their GP or specialist. And it's really rewarding when that occurs in clinical practice, because it's a definite positive outcome we're seeing, and the result means less side effects down the line for our patients. And maybe we could talk a little bit about how do we all right, we've acknowledged a lot of problems and what damage can occur with high stress and a dysregulated HPA axis. So what can be done to course correct that, Shannon? And maybe talk a little bit about nutrients or herbal medicines, or you might have some really unique ways of dealing with some of these patients yourself.
I wish it was that simple.
But
where do I start?
It's a multimodality sort of approach, isn't it? But anything you would like to enlighten us with?
Yeah, well, this podcast discussion is about cortisol and stress, so I'll stick with that. But I mean, obviously, I could use some things for the gut, even something as simple as slippery elm bark to reduce the inflammation. But I'm going to stick with the stress. I almost always go with herbs because they're so wonderful. And if I'm to target the stress to regulate that cortisol, often get like a flow on of really good positive effects. A little bit different. I'll go into a slightly different area, but one with fertility, it gives me so much success. with just addressing the stress. Seriously, like
Mm.
65, 75% infertility a patient and addressing the stress and the cortisol, and I'll just address that. And then 3 months later, they're pregnant and they're excited. We've had success with our pregnancy. So the cortisol and the stress is just so critical. How about you, Brad? What would you share? What would
Yeah,
you do?
I like that you brought that up, that treating the stress in many conditions can turn a condition around, even though
Mm.
that's not necessarily the primary focus. And
Yes,
fertility is a classic. Things like PCOS would be another one. Even
yes,
skin conditions. Sometimes
yes,
stress
yes.
is the missing component that's not well managed.
Sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
often, but yeah. I guess it's the art that Brad uses because he's skilled and experienced, and he can identify that where to go, because you might be watching this and think, wow, just treat stress, but maybe something, a pathogen or something else is more important. But
Mm.
that's why Brad's so skilled at that.
Well, you might be needing to treat a pathogen because the stress initially caused the disruption in the gut. So
Yes.
you'll be addressing that as well. But then the stress might be the underlying cause or the primary cause with everything. And we have
Mm.
great herbs like whether it's withania or it's astragalus, it's
Oh, chamomile,
Schisandra, oh yeah, your
lemon
nervine type
balm.
herbs, lemon balm,
Yes.
chamomile,
Beautiful.
passion
Sisyphus.
flower.
We'll go on and
Yeah,
on. Let's put
yeah,
them
there's
all in the mix.
no, we would never ever do that.
The
But
patient say, please, can you give me all of them?
but a lot of my favorite adaptogen herbs, if people haven't caught on, the main herbs we'll be mentioning here. But
Mm,
like Schisandra, Withania, Rhodiola, Romania, they're interesting enough. They're great at helping us modulate stress or the stress response. But their other mechanisms are often boosting immunity long term. And I often see this in clinic, and I do this myself. I will not be on my adaptogen mix, or I'll be neglecting it, not using it. I haven't put a mix together for myself, and weeks will go by, and my stress levels will go up, and lo and behold, down the track, I'm more vulnerable to cold and flus. And so that's a great little tip there for those out there, understanding that having herbs that help you with your stress,
yes.
in particular these adaptogens like Schisandra and Withania and Rhodiola, they will have long-term benefits for your immune system.
Yes,
And I think
definitely.
that's really important. And they tend to build up over time, giving you greater strength, and letting you adapt to stresses a lot better than if you're not on them at all. So that's, I think, a good little take home, the note there. And what else have we missed here in regards to the HPA access? Is there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't talked about?
Not off the top of my head. We could talk for hours and hours and go off on tangents.
Oh, you
But
mentioned you mentioned
oh yeah,
chamomile, lemon balm, so the nervous system itself,
yes,
and I think that's an important focus that we often treat as naturopaths, is the nervous system and strengthening the nervous system all throughout the body. So that we know that there's the enteric nervous system that controls the gastrointestinal tract. So,
mm-hmm.
if you don't really get that under control, and the nervine herbs can be brilliant at this, and especially when
Yes,
we use them for sleep as well, and you can find yourself um, the stress causing issues with gut health via
yes,
the enteric nervous system. So that's another mechanism that we have mentioned as well
yes,
that can be well treated by us as naturopaths.
yeah, yeah. That's
Okay, then.
correct. Yeah, yeah. Can I just add, like at the beginning, I talked about that sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system. I'll just add a little bit more to that because it
Yep.
ties in with what you said. But you don't, you shouldn't consciously think about digestion. It's an unconscious thing, same as breathing or heart beating. But unfortunately, the sympathetic dominance is when we're conscious of things. So things become into an overdrive. But that's what's occurring in the digestive system. Everything's becoming too conscious and not unconscious. And we need to get back into balance with those herbs. So quite often I will give a herb mix when someone will be so stressed, and it's really common that they'll say that they cried, and because they're so stressed and wound up that they don't even allow their nervous system to relax. They don't allow emotions because they just drive go on the cortisol. But then after having the herbs for 3 or 4 days, their nervous system unwinds and their emotions bubble up, and they express that parasympathetic crying and release of emotion, which is really wonderful to see, especially as men don't want to do that. But it is a
Exactly,
wonderful
yeah.
thing.
And I like the old terminology that the old school naturopaths used to use when you give yourself permission to
Yes.
be emotional and let out, and the herbs certainly can unlock that and release that. Homeopathic medicine has also been proven to be very good at that as well.
Mm-hmm. Any
So
tool we have,
yeah,
we'll use it for the benefit.
yeah. If this video has made you realize your gut or your mood might be part of a bigger picture, you'll want to watch this next video here. I'll show you exactly how your gut health can influence your mood, focus, and energy. So click right here to watch this next.